Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, Tim and Matt discuss 20 Japanese maples rarely ever talked about.
Konnichiwa, y'all, and welcome to the MrMaple Show. Guys, we talk about trees a lot on this channel, so we've covered a lot of Japanese maples. We've talked at length about tons and tons of plants, so we had this idea. Maybe this will be a reoccurring podcast if you guys like it. We're basically going to cover 20 trees that we normally don't talk about at all. So there's some really great plants that just get missed for whatever reason. Kate that works for us was joking earlier that these are the middle child. So I don't know, my middle child gets talked about the most because she's pretty fiery. But she said these were the middle children of the Japanese maple world. Some amazing plants that might sometimes get overlooked a little bit. So we've got some phenomenal stuff. And nobody's overlooking my Tenny. She's the middle kid in my family, but man, that kid's full of energy.
So we're going to have some interesting plants here, and we've got them 20 to number 1, but they're not really real number. We're just talking about 20 different plants that we don't normally talk about in a unique way. Starting off with the first one, y'all, we've got Acer palmatum redwood. Now, this is a selection by Edsel Woods, same guy who introduced Benny Otaki. Play on his name as well, Redwood, Edwood. I mean, his name is in the tree itself. You just take off the R. This is a coral bark selection. That's a classic one. Sometimes it's credited to Talon Buchholz introducing it because it was found by a collector, then brought to a nursery who introduced it into the trade. But this is a coral bark selection that was selected for being fairly hardy, easy for many nurserymen to grow, which in the Northwest, sometimes Sengukaku can be a little more difficult in a nursery setting. And it just gives you some like bright red bark during that winter interest.
This one's going to work zone 6 through 9, typically 12 to 15 foot. So a nice upright grower. Really, really great plant. I mean, Edwood was kind of famous for kind of auctioning off trees, doing these different kind of spaghetti dinners where he got trees to different nurserymen. Very influential guy on Talon Buchholz, and so Talon had been growing redwood for quite a while. Listed under his own introductions because he's one of the first ones to actually produce it and get it out there. Just a great plant, though, and even has really nice bark on slightly older trees as well.
All right, guys, coming up next, we've got Acer palmatum Kagane Sake. This is a very old selection. So on some of those really old lists from Japan, the name translates as golden prosperity because it has a really nice golden fall color. But the spring interest is really what draws me to Kagane Sake because it really has a really nice green leaf, but with some really nice purple red nails.
Yeah, this one's going to work zones 5 through 9, typically around 8 foot in a 10-year period. Nice kind of spread to it as well. Beautiful border to this. One of the more crisp borders. I absolutely love that purplish border to it. Kagane Sake, rare to see. Like, it's one you don't see a lot. We will be talking about it, or we recently have, because we've brought it back to a 10 at 10 recently. If you don't see some of these plants on our website, you can always sign up to get notified when they're back in stock on MrMaple.com under each cultivar page. So our first notification is always the 10 at 10 email. But I know, for example, here's one we don't talk about a lot, but Kagane Sake recently did return to a 10 at 10. Just a beautiful plant. Love the foliage on it, crisp, clean foliage. Really just kind of one of the best showy places for that purple border to be.
Now, coming up next, we've got Acer palmatum Suri Nishiki, and that's Tsuri. That's how Suri. The T is kind of silent whenever you pronounce that.
Hard to say a lot of times for Americans. It's tricky for me even. This one's going to work zones 5 through 9. An older selection, very rare still in the trade. You'll see Nishiki a lot on variegated plants. This one's not necessarily variegated. It has a very large leaf to it. Narrow, irregular lobes, typically around 10 to 12 feet tall.
Yeah, the lobes are very unique. I mean, it's got a leaf almost like a full moon maple, as wide as it is, but it looks almost like a linear as narrow as the lobes are on the leaf. I mean, they're deeply divided back, but the lobes are a little bit fatter, which is really unusual and different. To me, if you see one of these out in the landscape in some of the older gardens, because you don't see this in the trade that frequently nowadays.
It was really nice with the Morris Arboretum.
Yeah, I mean, you see And there's one down in Spartanburg, South Carolina, near that big Germain's at Kristen and Bill Taylor's as well. But you don't see this commonly in the trade anymore. It's one that's almost getting lost to time, but it's very distinctive. Those leaves, the way they're so deeply divided, and the way they sort of hang there on the leaf with sort of slightly kind of cupping upwards, but then kind of twisting a little bit, give a unique texture in the landscape. So this is a very distinctive tree that was very popular, say 15 years ago, but you don't see it in the trade much today.
Yeah, typically oranges to reds on the fall for that one. A little bit more regular on the shape too, kind of a unique shape to that one. I mean, I know I'm thinking about some of the older ones I've seen, but it tends to not be your typical upright tree shape, a little bit more spreading. All right, guys, coming here at number 17, we've got a red upright that I don't know that we've talked about before here much. It's on Mr. Maple, hadn't been offered in a while. We'll have to bring it back. Acer palmatum mahogany. This is a deep red, as you can imagine, with the name mahogany. It's got a deep, deep red coloration to it. Going to work zones 5 through 9, typically in that 8 to 10 foot kind of range.
Yeah, the color is a different color than your typical red upright. I mean, you get more of that mahogany kind of brown red to it, which is very distinctive for the selection. And the fall colors on it are really bright and intense, which is very dynamic from the mahogany color that it is in the early spring. This is not your typical red upright, and we haven't offered in a while on Mr. Maple. And when I was going through Mr. Maple, the Mr. Maple files on MrMaple.com, that's where you can see the full catalog of everything we've ever listed. That's one of the trees that stood out to me is, man, I haven't talked about that tree in quite a while. It's really distinctive on its color. Beautiful selection.
All right, guys, coming in here at number 16, another oldie but goodie. We haven't offered it a lot. A lot of these kind of things are kind of fun because Tim and I can kind of make some notes here during grafting season on some things we need to bring back. We've got at number 16, Acer palmatum dissectum pendulum Julian. Beautiful tree. Again, going to work zones 5 through 9. Typically 5 foot tall, 5 to 6 foot wide, that kind of shape to it. It's been around a minute. Like this one was first recorded in 1935 and I believe been brought to the United States by Henry Holman. Henry Holman, just absolute. We need to do a whole focus on him at some point. You know, I know Don Shadow had a letter he wrote to Henry Holman when he was like 12 about a Japanese maple. That was pretty cool. Don showed us that. Henry Holman, another one of those early pioneers of Japanese maples in the United States. So kind of one he helped popularize, coming from Yokohama Nursery in Japan.
Now, Pendulum Julian is a lace leaf that is very ornate in its leaf itself. Heavily dissected leaves that are very dissected and really fit that name lace leaf. I mean, you get extreme dissected leaves on this one, which is really nice. The color is somewhere between a Tamukiyama and an ornatum, maybe an Abishari and an ornatum, because you get a purple, orange-red kind of color out of it with some really nice green eyes to it. And then the fall color gives you some really nice orange. One of those trees that you don't see much in the trade. There's a beautiful one at the J.C. Rouston Arboretum that I love. It's typically there in the Lath House. And sometimes they move those trees around from the Lath House at the J.C. Rouston. But, I mean, that is one of the trees right as you're at that exit point of the Lath House that's just dynamic in its structure. It just has that great cascading habit. And as it ages, it just gets more and more beautiful.
I always think Alexander Julian, who's like the designer that put the Argyles on like the Tar Heel jerseys. He designed like the Hornets jerseys back in the day. So maybe it's a designer tree as well. All right, coming here at number 15, you've got Yagure.
Now, Yagure is, I guess, one of the first that give you a color. I'd venture to say Gable's Glory might be from the lineage of Yagure or something like that.
Interesting.
I mean, you get some bark that is very similar to Gable's Glory, and you get a color that is very brick, pink-red kind of color that's very unique.
Definitely a bright picked up pink in the early spring, kind of a lime green bark to it. It's been one that's been around. It's referenced back over 200 years ago, so it's been around a while. Really a nice tree that kind of changes colors throughout the season. Typically 10 to 12 foot. It's a little bit more heavily matsumuried, so you got a little bit more divided leaf.
And it's one of those trees that needs some protection from the hot afternoon sun in most climates, but the spring color on it can give you some pink reds that are very distinctive. And for me, that is one of the things that makes a garden just really speak to me, is trees that give good color contrast and things that stand out from what you typically see in a garden.
All right, moving along here at number 14, we've got Acer palmatum red falcon. Unique plant here as well. Another heavily divided Leonard Loblam style Japanese maple. This one's going to work zones 5 through 9, typically around 7 foot in that 10-year span. Growth can depend a little bit on regional differences, but good grower. Has that more bamboo-like growth to it and a dark foliage.
Red Falcon's credited to Stepping Stones Nursery in New Zealand, and I often wonder, is this something they introduced or is it something they got a hold of? Like, they got a hold of Red Dragon and made it popular in the trade, but it was really found by Dick Wolf. So, really awesome selection, though, and a smaller red Linerlobum that really has a really nice vase shape.
Great looking plant. Nice one to add that texture, that Linerlobum, that kind of bamboo-like aesthetic to the garden. All right, coming in here at number 13, we've got Alpine Silver Thread.
Now, Alpine Silver Thread is a reticulated upright in the line of like a reticulatum or a Shikaratsu Sawa. But one of the things that I've noticed with Alpine Silver Thread is it appears to be a little more upright and not as wide as some of those selections.
It can get a nice almost glow to it, like especially with some light. It gets a very pale color to also a very contrasting green. So it really shows out because you get so much division within the color. Going to work zones 5 through 9, typically around 7 to 8 foot in that 10-year span. So not a giant plant as well. Pairs up well nicely with a lot of the Ghost series. A lot of the new Ghosts look really great with Alpine Silver Thread. Really nice reticulation, kind of creamy variegation to it, but I like early spring when it's a little bit more pronounced.
Guys, next up, we've got Acer palmatum Atami Nishiki. Now, this is a variegated Japanese maple that I think should be getting more love. People love variegation, they love flash, and this one does it in a very different way. In the springtime, you can get some oranges and pinks on the margins on this, I guess somewhere in between like a Manny no Sato and Geisha Gone Wild style variegation.
Yeah, I like that. Really unique. Now, we do believe that Atami Nishiki and Atami Nabluki are the same plant. So you'll see that sometimes referenced as Atami Nabluki. Nishiki, you'll see it reoccurring a lot. Doesn't always mean variegated. A lot of people say it's kind of closer to a translation like brocade, but it often means that a tree has a unique variegation once you see that on a tree coming from Japan. Really next level style variegation. I mean, this pairs really well with something even like Geisha Gone Wild, because you kind of get some of that wild coloration going on there too. You're getting a little bit more pink on green. It just gives you a really interesting style to it. It's almost like orangey pink in the early spring as well on a light green variegation. Really interesting. Each leaf has a unique different shape to it. Typically around 6 foot in 10 years. Another one's going to work zones 5 through 9.
Now, next up, we've got coming in our 11th tree we're going to be talking about, number 11 going down to number 1. We got Mizu Kaguri. This is a really unique Aminum style leaf that has a spring interest. You get some really nice burgundy bronzes, almost over like a blonde lime green. And it is one of the most amazing spring interest Aminum style leaves I've seen. Yeah,
Mizu Kaguri, typically 8 to 10 foot in that kind of size range. Nice upright tree. You kind of get a little bit of what you like from Moonrise out of this one. You can get some weird apricots. It's not as defined as Moonrise, but you get some nice pale pink growth going on, like a blushing over top of yellow of a lot of secondary colors. Really showy. I've had it be bright orange in the spring as well. And then kind of some bronze burgundy kind of borders to that. So it's really unique in how it kind of highlights the color. And you get a little bit of color separation going on this plant. Really nice one. Typically zones 5 through 9 for this one as well, which is going to be most of our maples, but I do clarify because we had the redwood on here. Mizu Kaguri, though, super beautiful. I think you're going to love the kind of the nuances this one brings to the garden.
I think a fun one to pair that one out there in the garden with would be Pink Panther, because you get some of those pink colors playing off of the sort of the blondes and bronze highlights on that. Amazing spring interest Aminums. Those would be fun to play against each other in the garden. Y'all, next up at coming in next, we've got Makawa Nishiki.
Makawa Nishiki, a fun one. This one is in that kind of Higasiyama Alpenweiss family. It's called Makawa, but it isn't shaped like Makawa. Where it actually gets the Makawa name is it has large leaves the size of Makawa. So the leaf shape itself is very similar to that of Makawa Yetsubusa, not the actual structure of the tree. Beautiful large leaf form with Higasiyama style variegation. Some of the most pronounced of that variegation as well.
Now, one thing we know from collecting and going through so much Makawa Yetsubusa seed is that many of the seedlings that you collect from Makawa Yetsubusa are upright. And then you start looking through those, and some of those end up being reticulated like Higasiyama in their actual variegation. I often wonder if Makawa Nishiki wasn't from the seed progeny of Macawi etabusa itself, because it does have that larger leaf like Macawi etabusa, but the reticulation that I've seen on some of the seedlings like we have at the Buckholtz farm that have that Higashiyama style.
Large ruffled leaf, really beautiful. Makes a perfect palette. I've had some of the best kind of pink purple color on this one for a Higashiyama style. Really showy. I do like the larger leaf. I think it really adds a lot to it, especially when it's cupped and it's just leafing out. It really looks just so next level. But the bigger leaf is really the feature on this one. I think that's super special. Typically 5 to 6 foot tall in 10 years. So it isn't a giant, but it does get out there. You don't see it enough anymore. I think it's just a next level plant that we probably don't talk about enough. We used to offer this one quite a bit, I'd say 15 years ago.
I think we've offered it a couple times on a weekly whammy, maybe, when we were dropping our limited numbers on Fridays on Mr. Maple. But it's one that really has sort of got lost to time for us. We need to get back in production because it is a really beautiful tree in the garden. And Talon Buckholtz, when he was visiting a garden in Tokyo, Japan, named Kokyo, collected some seed from the Emperor's Garden there and named it Kokyo, which is our next Japanese maple.
Kokyo, super interesting plant. Brilliant oranges in the fall. Officially one of the Flora Wonder collection since it comes from Talon Buckholtz, but they did originate the seeds from Japan. Really great color changes on this one. I mean, I think it's a brilliant red-orange. You can often get kind of some yellowish eye going on to that with that bold, kind of more brick orange-red. So it's a very defined, unique orange in the fall. It's like you blend orange and red so much, you get this unique kind of color. Absolutely super next level. I know it's one we try to bring back frequently. Now that we're doing all of the trees from the Flora Wonder collection, it's one you'll see more commonly. Typically 8 to 10 foot and just really shows out.
One of my favorite times for Kokyo is that midsummer time frame when the new growth can be like a coral pink on a bigger aminum leaf. So you got a leaf that looks like an Osakazuki putting on coral pink new growth, and the older growth is green, so you get good color contrast between the two. Just something dynamic about that when you have that in the garden with the color contrast. Awesome selection. One of the rare selections you don't see much in the trade from Talon Buckholtz. But again, this came from the Emperor's Garden in Tokyo, Japan.
All right, coming in here at number 8 on the Japanese maples we don't talk about enough, we've got Beni Kumo Nosu. Now, this is a tree that translates as red spider's web. Probably gets overshadowed a little bit at Mr. Maple by red filigree, which we offer more. It is one of those ones with a more thinly divided red foliage, so you get that really intricate foliage to it. Been a great plant, though. We do need to be doing it more frequently.
And this is a little more vigorous than red filigree lace or red feathers as well. Mm-hmm. The leaf is really deeply divided, and it's an easy tree for many people to grow. It doesn't hold its color as well as red filigree lace, but the leaf texture is phenomenal with that deeply divided leaves. Del Laux introduced some amazing selections, and this is one of his trees that sort of almost gotten lost to time. I mean, because red filigree lace has become so popular, you see less and less of red spider's web, a.k.a. Beni Kumo Nosu, in the trade. Beautiful
plant, guys. And again, he talked about it getting out there a little quicker. You know, in a 10-year span, it's not uncommon to have a 4-foot tall tree at 6 foot wide. So much more vigorous than something like the red filigree, which would be maybe even 3 by 3 in that same time frame. I've had really beautiful fall color on this. I've had fall color on this one that could rival Crimson Queen. I mean, really electric pink red. So really good fall color tree as well. Typically, again, zones 5 through 9. Another great Del Laux introduction. Again, probably one we need to bring back. You know, we forget about this being so much faster growing than red filigree. So good commercial use there as well.
Next up, we've got a heat-tolerant red upright called Acer Palmatum Summer Sunset. Selection by Paul Lowe down in Alabama. And when I think about this tree, I just think about going sitting on his porch at his house and just talking about Japanese maples with him. And, you know, him and his wife just came out and spent so much time with us when we went to go visit their nursery. Such a great family, and they've got some amazing introductions.
Great place, great introductions. We're actually working on a whole series from Millstone. Most of them we've put Millstone or All Good in front of. Summer Sunset's been around a while, so this is a quintessential heat-tolerant, I would say upright red. And Dr. Durr, whenever he talks to me, he normally points at me and goes, heat-tolerant red for the South. It's like he's quizzing me a little bit. I love that from Dr. Durr, but A lot of times my answer to him for one of the most heat-tolerant reds for the South would be Summer Sunset. I think it's excellent. It's durable. It holds its red really well. And it's just a good plant. I mean, it's one we're going to be bringing back continuously here to Mr. Maple. Dark foliage, holds well into the summer. You know, not a giant, typically 8 to 10 foot, so it's kind of a competitor to Fireglow for the size range of it. But I've really been impressed with its ability to hold its color, even down there in Alabama. Bright, fiery red fall color, but more of a deep red throughout the season, so a little bit darker. I would almost compare it as more of a little competitor to like Jet Black for the darkness of it as well.
But I will say the fall color on this is very much in the line of Osakazuki.
Oh,
I mean, it's got one of the better fall colors of a red upright as well, which is really striking for me. Again, I'm looking at these trees that we made on this list, and I'm like, this is one we need to be doing more. I mean, how are we not producing more summer sunset here at Mr. Maple? We got to bring it back.
All right, coming in here at number 6, we've got one named for Ellen DeGeneres. Poor Van Gelder introduction, if I checked. Really a cool plant, typically 3 to 4 feet tall, but about 7 feet wide, so a little wider than it is tall. I do like the leaf, really divided, heavily dissected leaf. I've had this be some incredible shades of orange in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, as a green lace leaf, the leaf reminds me, like you were mentioning off of camera earlier, something like filigree, almost like Felis, which is another one of Core's introductions. And, you know, both of those are reticulated, but we don't see as much of that strongly pronounced here on this leaf. You get more of a clear green leaf, but with just such very beautiful, deeply dissected leaves, but in a very ornate way.
All right, coming in here, we're in the top 5 of Japanese maples we don't normally talk about. And here's one we used to offer a lot back in the early Maple Mafia eBay days. I know we sold a ton of these on eBay like 15 years ago. We've got Acer palmatum Chiri Hime. Interesting rare dwarf. You don't see this one a lot anymore. 4 to 5 feet tall, even in a 10-15 year span, so not a giant plant. Great for patio planters. A really unique one we probably need to bring back a little bit more. I think a lot of the Makawa collectors would definitely be chasing some Chiri Himes.
Our photos do not do it justice on Mr. Maple. It has a Matsumuri style leaf, but almost a Makawa-like habit.
Right.
And that's the thing that makes this thing really different. You got almost like a coral pink new growth to it as well. It is very different and unusual to what I've seen in the trade. I've seen some large specimens of this in Oregon, and they get kind of wide with age. It really surprised me. Our one at Maplewood Gardens at our parents' home is very small and slow growing. It takes a while for it to get out there here in Western North Carolina, but I have seen some large specimens that were quite impressive. This is a slow growing dwarf that I think we got to bring back.
All right, guys, we're all the way down in the top 5. That was number 5. Number 4, we've got Reticulatum Como. This is Acer palmatum Reticulatum Como. Another one we probably hadn't brought back a lot since our early Maple Mafia days. We used to sell a lot on eBay. You can go check out our new eBay, by the way. We brought it back by popular request. You guys wanted it back, so the Maple Mafia is back on eBay. So check that out sometime. There's some really cool plants that go off, typically each Sunday on there. Guys, Reticulatum Como is crazy next level. This thing doesn't look real. Probably a competitor to the original Peaches and Cream kind of color pattern wise. I've had it have a yellowish eye with some just next level pinks, especially on the border of the leaf, pink to purple. Typically 6 to 8 foot in 15 years. We got to bring this series back. I know we're going to talk about another one, but Reticulatum Como, man, when I first saw this thing too, my jaw about hit the ground.
Yeah, I mean, where Peaches and Cream is peach color and cream, this one is more pinks and cream. And for that Reticulatum Shikatsusawa kind of reticulated variegation, this is one that was introduced in Holland, but one you don't see commonly in the trade. We've offered it before. Again, we got to bring this one back.
This is a good reminder to me to get this grafted. Really next level variegation. I love this one. It's super showy. Yeah, it's one of those plants that when I first saw it, I remember just freaking out over the color patterns on this one. Last offered at Mr. Maple in a 3-gallon, so we got to get that one going again.
Oh, man. Next up, we're all the way down to 4 left, all the way down to 3 left. We've got Reticulatum Purple. Now, this is from that same person in Holland who introduced Reticulatum Como. This is Reticulatum Purple, and it has a little more purple tinges to it in that early spring, with that kind of peaches and cream kind of vibe as well.
Yeah, it kind of fits the two together. I like offering both these at the same time. You get the pink with that one. You get the purple with this one. I've had it be a little bit more almost metallic-y purple. That real dark forest green in the vein. So a really nice, darker vein. So something you don't really think about on this one is like it's purple on the tips. It's creamy white in the middle. And then dark green veining. So there's really 3 prominent colors, especially in early spring. Pictures don't do this one justice. Again, another one we've got to get back into the production on this one. I'm glad we're doing this because it's fun to talk about ones we don't normally talk about, but love the color on this one.
I know this podcast may be hard for some people because you're listening to stuff that, may be available in a year or two here at Mr. Maple rather than what's available right now. Next up, we've got Acer palmatum Saab B. And this is from the same nursery near Houston, Texas, that introduced Baton Rouge. Saab B, however, is a reticulated form that shows good reticulation in the high heat of Texas, which means its variegation is very consistent and does really well because down there, Higashiyama is more green form.
Yeah, we often tell people when you buy Higashiyama, it's going to be greenhouse grown. A lot of times they'll be greener that first season. I've really been impressed with Saab B, even in our high heat greenhouses, holding more reticulation. So it's one for that high heat setting for sure. Another one with a little bit larger leaf than Higashiyama. Great color patterns to it. Really shows out. A lot of pink going on in Saab B. It isn't that Higashiyama, Alpenweiss, eye candy style vein to it. So, but a great one for the people in those high heat zones. I've had a lot of white in this one, especially here in Western North Carolina when I'm growing it. I've had a lot of kind of pale white with that reticulated veining going on. A little bit bigger leaf, like I was mentioning, typically 6 to 8 foot in a 10-year span. Coming from out just outside of Houston, though, you got to be heat tolerant.
Now, coming in on our last one for today's podcast of 20 Japanese maples we don't normally talk about, we're going to talk about Acer palmatum Sakumo. And again, that's got that TS thing Matt was talking about earlier. Real hard to pronounce. I often just skip the T and go with the S. So say Sakumo. That sounds closer to me than my weird mispronunciations.
You kind of put that tongue on the top of the mouth and go, Tasumo. Tasim Nichols. I don't know. All right. Tasumo, great plant. Really a miniature maple. Typically 1.5 feet tall, 2 feet wide. One of the first times I ever saw this tree was in the ground at Red Maple Nurseries. We were visiting Billy Schwartz. I think he made us spaghetti and we hung out all day. And we were out in his garden and it was just kind of hidden away because obviously he has a mature garden at the time. He's since sold that home, but at Red Mansion Nurseries, he had some nice mature trees in the ground. And there was this beautiful Sakumo just kind of hidden away. I think it had some dailies kind of growing around it, so they were starting to cover it up a little bit because it's such a small plant. So you do want to give this one its own space. But I remember him being like, this is one of the most special dwarfs, maybe one of the smallest of all.
And his was probably 1 foot tall or so. I mean, it was tiny. And it's such a slow grower. It's one, I would say it's probably second on dwarf growth rate only to something like Sir Happy. It's one of the slower growing maples I've ever seen. It's in that Makawa-like family, but it has a twisting leaf to it, a little bit larger leaf.
It reminds me of a smaller leaf form, not in the shape of the tree, but the shape of the leaf. It reminds me a little bit more of like Teroyama almost, that twisting, curling, kind of fluffy look it has to it.
Now, years ago, we were coming back from a Maple Society meeting, and it was just me and Richard Bomar. And Matt had something he had to leave and go do. And we stopped by Boxerwood Nature Center in Lexington, Virginia. And that's where Baby Lace Lexington comes from. There's a guy named Dr. Robert S. Munger, who's kind of like Bob Bullington area. We have Bullington gardens that you can go visit nearby. The guy was a maple collector extraordinaire. This is in Lexington, Virginia, and they had a specimen of Sakumo that was probably 3.5 feet tall.
Nice.
Maybe 4 foot wide. I mean, one of the best specimens I've ever seen of this dwarf. You could tell it had a lot of age. I often wondered, I'm like, man, where have I seen any other time Sakumo rather than at our nursery in Boxerwood or at Billy Schwartz's? You don't see it anymore. It's a tree that's been lost to time, but I think the collector market would go crazy for Sakumo right now.
We got to get it back in the trade. I would say, it's a small one, but it's a lot more durable than something like Sir Happy that gets all the attention. So it's a more durable plant. Really nice. I mean, I've seen some that were kind of, like I said, that one was kind of in the middle of the dailies, so it kind of didn't get all the attention there.
And this isn't to get confused with Sakushigumo.
Yeah.
This isn't to get confused with A lot of trees that sound very similar to this.
Right.
There's a lot of Japanese names that sound very similar to this
Tsukumo,
Tsukushigata.
those small, compact, ruffled foliage. Again, zones 5 through 9. Great for the container garden. And if you don't see it currently in stock, you can always sign up to get notified on Mr. Maple when it's back. It's fun little topic here today. I hope you've enjoyed 20 trees we don't normally talk about. We kind of went through and went through some things that we've done a lot in the past, but maybe they've gotten less attention over the last 10 years. And our business has grown so much in the last 10 years that a lot of you people probably weren't following us back when these were some of our top items. So kind of a fun way to bring a few of these back, talk about some different trees. We talk about trees so much here. It's really fun to kind of deep dive into things that have kind of fallen between the cracks a little bit.
We got to bring them back, man. I mean, for me, there's so many awesome trees out there. And our goal at Mr. Maple is to make many of these trees available and easy for you to get through MrMaple.com. We are a family mail order nursery. We ship directly to your door, and we do the largest selection of Japanese maples of anywhere in the country. And our goal is to make this easy for you to get. And so that's what we work hard each and every day. And these trees, if they're not currently on MrMaple.com, sign up. I'm going to be working hard to try to bring these trees back.
Guys, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform that helps other people see us. Then immediately go to the Mr. Maple YouTube and subscribe. We do add video components to these on Sunday evenings. If you like Japanese maples, like our podcast, but if you love them, make sure to share it. We really appreciate it if you'd shop on MrMaple.com.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.